So good morning, everyone, and welcome to this BSG, British Society of Gerontology and Centre for Ageing and Dementia event. It's a Devolved Nations event, and it's part of a year of collaboration we've had with the British Society of Gerontology. We've participated in CADR's annual photo competition, which this year was Creatively Ageing, where we've had submissions which were poetry, photographs, drawings, all sorts submitted by older people and organisations that work with older people. So we're really looking forward to this event this morning. For those of you who are here in person, we've got lunch later on and a free workshop this afternoon, which Merrin and Awen are going to kindly run for us. And so the programme for today is obviously you've made your own tea and coffee if you're at home. But if you're here, we've got tea and coffee outside. Toilets are downstairs if anybody needs them. We're not expecting any fire alarms, so if there are any, we'll signpost you to the exits. So I'm Deb Morgan, and I'm a researcher at the Centre for Ageing and Dementia Research. If I just kick something off. Okay. But I'm also a member of the British Society of Gerontology, responsible for the Devolved Nations portfolio, of which this event forms part of it. So we're delighted this morning to have presentations from Dr. Gemma Carney. We're delighted to have over from Queen's University in Belfast, talking about some of the work they're doing there. And then we have Gareth and Reese and Sharon Ford from our national museums talking about their work. Then we'll have a short break. And then we've got Dr. Merrin Thomas, talking about the Optic project, which a few of us have been working on, which was about intergenerational perspectives of climate change. And we've had great fun doing that, producing a comic book. And then we've got Dr. Awen Williams, who's going to talk about his PhD using creative methods, and particularly collage. And then, like I said, for those who are in person, we've got lunch and a creative workshop. If you have any questions and you're online, please just put them in the chat and Kim will forward them to us. So I'm going to kick off now then and invite Gemma up to talk about her work. So let's get, on the screen just now, just some of our submissions that we've had for the competition, and we'll showcase some more later on a reel. Wow. So I'm going to hand over to Gemma.
So how long do I have, Deb, exactly?
20 minutes, and then we've got about 10 minutes for questions.
Okay, is it okay if I'm like 23 minutes? Is that okay? That just means I breathe between slides. It is 20, but including with my little media player bit. But at the same time, it's nice to have that extra 3 minutes, isn't it? Just to breathe. So I'm absolutely thrilled to be here. The project that I'm going to talk to you about today is an AHRC funded project. That was one of those early career grants. So I was the co-investigator, and the PI was an early career scholar called Jane Lugaya. And she is a linguist. So it was kind of linguistics first and gerontology second, but we've really developed a brilliant working partnership, I think. And it's part of a range of different things that we do at Queen's. So I started working there 10 years ago in the ARC Ageing program, which was kind of a straightforward project looking at working with the community and building knowledge around ageing in Northern Ireland. And that has grown because of just good relationships in our arts humanities faculty into kind of, we've got to become a bit of a hub really for interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary, particularly with arts and humanities. So some of the projects that are worth having a look at is the Lively project, which is one that was Wellcome funded, which I led with Leonie Hannon, and we used an idea from Penelope Lively's memoir, Ammonites and Leaping Fish, a really good recommendation for your bookshop, for your book club, Jennifer, where she found 6 objects that told the story of her life. So we did that with a group of people, and then that developed into a PhD student who's just graduated and is now taking all his artsy knowledge into the Commissioner for Older People's office. So I'm really thrilled to see that there's a connection between policy and arts and humanities research, because very often they're put into different categories. We've done a bit of work, Leonie and I've done a bit of work in history as well. So this is the project I'm going to talk about today. I better not start rambling. I better stay on message. Is this one, which is dementia in the minds of characters and readers. All of this work comes from a very strong belief that aging is a human experience. And I use the words here of my old friend from NUI Galway, who sadly passed away very young, Rika Edmondson. And Rika was really at the spearhead of European humanistic gerontology. And she said, all that is necessary to prevent any group of people from actively contributing to what goes on is the absence of a discourse or of any pervasive set of languages and expectations that anticipate that they will do and say things of importance. This kind of exclusionary silences that we have around older people, particularly people with dementia, who very often are depicted as not being able to, articulate their needs and not really being worth listening to. So what we did was to say, okay, so you're saying that people with dementia don't have language. So, well, where is the language? Well, there's lots and lots of brilliant language around dementia in fictional books about dementia. So let's see whether these extracts invoke empathy. And let's ask older people with dementia themselves, how they feel about it. So one of the articles is this one, who's in the Gerontologist. It's open access, so you can read it without having to go through all those logins. And as you can see, the views of the people with dementia is absolutely central to, this is our main article for gerontologists, and it is sometimers, Alzheimer's. I love that, that's definitely me. So that's one of the readers talking about, he's quoting one of the fictional characters and saying, that's just like me. So I'm going to take you through what the people with dementia said basically in today's talk, but this is our team. I won't spend too long on that, but you can see that we're quite a diverse team, other than to say, couldn't have done this work without Dementia and I in particular, and the Alzheimer's Society. And this is Jan Carson, who's quite a famous author now, who was our outreach officer at the time, and she is well worth reading in her own right. But one thing to clarify as well, so this is our research question: how can the language of dementia fiction, so fictional books that are about dementia, characters with dementia, how can that help us to understand the experience of living with dementia? The main point I want to make here is that really this is the overlap for our project in terms of disciplines. The linguistics that Jane and Carolina know about, and our critical gerontology, mine and Paula, literary studies is relevant, but we weren't talking about the books like you would at a book club. We weren't doing a literary analysis. We were interrogating the language. What kind of metaphors did they use? What kind of words? So I think that our work really goes into a very interesting whole range of literature that's developing over the last 10 or 15 years. This article is now kind of canonical in this area of cultural gerontology. It's really worth looking at. Clark went and looked at 10 years of like Time magazine, of those kind of magazines, looking for the experience of dementia from people who have dementia, and reported that they were the missing person. The absence of the person with the disease as a person with a voice, with needs and desires. When the disease itself is described, it's characterized as fearsome, relentless, and aggressive. So this is what we started to find when we looked at the kind of public discourse around dementia and how we kind of reconcile that with people's lived experience. And what you find is that the disease is, I keep doing this this kind of I'm acting out the monstrous metaphor of dementia, and that's the way it is. And if you start to tune into that, you really quickly realize that we're getting this message left, right, and center. This is a study that I love as well in qualitative health research. Harvey and Brooks did a study of Getty images on the internet, and they found that older people with dementia are represented in objectifying and dehumanizing terms, emphasizing disease and deficit at the expense of the whole person, precluding any possibility of enduring personhood. That once you have dementia, you're then put into this category, a kind of a non-person category they found. Well, this is just what they found in terms of Getty images, of course. Then there was another study done by Bailey and colleagues called Battles and Breakthroughs, where they looked at how the press report on dementia. And again, it is this, what's the scientific discovery? Can we get the cure? And everybody wants a cure, but everybody wants world peace too. But the point is that you need to actually engage with what you are talking about. So they use a combination of corpus linguistics, which is looking at all the words that are out there in the newspapers about it, and then did a critical discourse analysis. And they found that the most salient discourse was the portrayal of dementia in biomedical terms. So if we go back to Gerontology 101 and the person in dementia and Tom Kitwood, we start to realize that the changes that we've experienced in terms of technology and how we consume information and everything has made it even harder to maintain that personhood in dementia. So we wanted to look at, what other ways is dementia talked about in the world, and what can we do to kind of address this problem. So I think the work that we are doing, while it is very academic in some ways, in another way, I think it hits a really nice kind of middle ground in terms of being able to influence things. And I would put it into the category of this great work that I absolutely love, that Tom Shakespeare has been leading, which is the Dementia Inquirers, where he's using the critical disability studies approach, saying nothing about us without us. So it was basically a group of older people we'd done research with who had dementia, and they couldn't get through the ethics committee. So they said, right, we'll just be the authors ourselves, which I thought was absolutely brilliantly subversive. So our project was a bit subversive too, and ethics was difficult, because we're trying to say, well, we're going to show all these people who have dementia, we're going to show them some extracts that are about fictional characters, so there was a fear that we were going to cause some anxiety and problems. So it was challenging in that way, but particularly because I think we were using language to talk to people about something where language decreases. So we wanted to look at a few things, really. First of all, to look at what is in this dementia fiction. So how do writers draw out the symptoms? They could be writing absolute rubbish, so that was a very important part of the project. To use the methods from our different disciplines to look then at how the fictional characters that are depicted by writers, how do they impact on readers? That was the other big thing. So it was the characters and readers, and to include carers and people with dementia as readers. So there has been a boom in dementia fiction. So the first justification for doing this kind of study is, well, millions of people are reading these books, so we need to see what's in them. So the books we chose were very carefully decanted from the huge range. And this is because we wanted to pick novels that provide an inroad into understanding the life world of others. So this is where the linguistic analysis really came in. There's a huge weight of evidence behind different types of narrative that are used, different types of characterization, and that while this is complicated and difficult, it still is, in a way, if you think about it, how else can you ever get inside the mind of somebody with dementia? How else can you? So in that way, it's well worth doing, we thought. So Jane spent 6 months selecting the text. So we did a huge amount of work, and then we very carefully worked as a team to select the 12 extracts from these are the books that we actually used. So what I'm going to give is a little taste of what we did with the readers, basically. I'll do that at the end of the talk. So it's not abstract, because I'm being quite abstract, I understand. But I want to focus it for a minute a little bit on the fictional characters with dementia. Because actually, I think what I took away from this project, as the gerontologist who's always looking at lived experience, is how valuable the lived experience of a fictional character was, for lots of different reasons. First of all, they gave first-person narration, so they were talking about their experience of living with dementia. It was a real-life scenario, it seemed, so this was something that people could relate to. The language was really, really eloquent, much more eloquent than you would be if you were just trying to express something. But I think the thing that I found most useful is, so often when somebody has dementia, they're put into that category as diagnosed, and then that's all they are. Whereas these characters have a whole backstory, there's a richness, there's a whole sense, and you'll see that when you listen to the extract from Marina, Madonnas of Leningrad, that her whole life experience of having been in the siege of Leningrad is influencing then how we see her as an 8-year-old with dementia. And of course, because you have characterization within a book, you have different reactions. So that's very useful to look at how people react to different scenarios with dementia. So we did 6 weekly reading groups. We did a pilot and decided to divide people into these groups. So we had social work students, carers of people with dementia, and the general public. I could do another paper on why we did that, but don't have time. But basically what we did was we had the 12 books. We had 2 extracts for each session. The extract was about 2 or 3 minutes long. Jan recorded the extract beautiful in her beautiful Northern Irish accent. It was read aloud, and then there was a questionnaire and a discussion. And we made several changes for the people with dementia so that they could, we had to facilitate them taking part online because it was during COVID, but also we sent out things to them by post and they took part. So it was really not a problem at all. They were aided by Dementia and I, but also they were just well able to take part. We did make one change on the recommendation of Dementia and I, which is that they just did one extract per week. But in the paper that was published and that I'm talking about today, it was extracts that everybody saw, you know, so just for the sake of experimentation. So our readers were 21 female, 11 male, aged between 18 and 79, tended to be white and middle class. There was a definite self-selection bias towards people who had some kind of interest with dementia. We had a good take-up and retention, but of course there's limitations to a sample like that. For the general public, I mean, the big difference was how different. I think the biggest finding for me was that your interpretation and reaction to the fictional character with dementia was really, really dependent on what your lived experience of dementia was. So for the general public, some of them were really quite distant from the experience of dementia, but they loved the books elements, you know, they loved the story. The social work students had the biggest age gap. They were kind of very interested in gender. The carers had the most challenging and emotional responses and were much more likely to be skeptical of the kind of psycho-narration of the person with the fictional character with dementia. You know, that they were skeptical that there could be that level of thought. But we weren't claiming that it's true. But what we were saying is, what would it be like if this was what was happening? So this is the big challenge for a social scientist when you do this kind of work. It's like, but it's not true. But the arts humanities people go, I never said it was true. It's a fictional representation, but lots of people are reading it. So let's see how they respond. So the carers have a really, really deep knowledge of dementia, but it is at that one remove and it's highly personalized. And I think that the most challenging thing, the paper that's published now, the most challenging thing in that is that I argue that carer's view is really the one that is given most credence by society. And in many ways it should be, but it is different to what the people with dementia said. So I'm going to show you what the people with dementia said. First of all, they kept saying, thank you so much for listening to us. And they were really thrilled not to have any family members or carers there. That was mentioned regularly. Which, you know, they were part of a group that met regularly anyway. So, and they were taking part in on Zoom. So they were really enjoying connecting because it all happened in 2021, you know. I was really amazed how they could engage. So there's the complex literary language. You'll hear one of the extracts now in a minute that they heard. And they might have responded in language that was a little simpler, but they completely understood what was going on. There was no, and there were varying levels of progression of disease. There was, but I'm really resisting getting into that, other than to say the longest away diagnosis was 9 years and somebody had been recently diagnosed. So there was quite a range of progression and things like that. But I don't want to get into that medical discussion. They're just readers in this context. They were very enthusiastic for the model, and actually they really loved reading again. And one of the things that was kind of a finding that we didn't expect is that listening was a great way for them to read. They said they would have no retention. They said, tomorrow I will not remember this at all, but I really enjoyed it at the time, which was interesting, you know, so that listening to stories. Right, so I am now going to share with you, what will I touch it, what will I do, Ree? I just want to play that little slide now. So basically this is, extract 1, week 2. This is the book, Madonnas of Leningrad. The character is Marina. I'm just going to give them an intro because it'll disappear when I play it, won't it? She's an art museum guide in Leningrad in Russia and was sieged there during Second World War. Now she's 82 and lives with her husband Dmitry in the USA, where they raise their children. In the extract, Marina forgets that she's had eggs for breakfast, continually travels back to Leningrad in her mind, and is vaguely aware that there is wedding she must attend, but struggles to remember either when it is happening or who will be there. That's the only introduction that's given to the readers, and then they hear the extract, which you will now, hopefully. Oh, looks good. See if we will.
It is as though she has been transported into a two-dimensional world, a book perhaps, and she exists only on this page. When the page turns, whatever was on the previous page disappears from her view. Marina finds herself standing in front of the kitchen sink, holding a saucepan of water, but she has no idea why. Is she rinsing the pan, or has she just finished filling it up? It is a puzzle. Sometimes it requires all her wits to piece together the world with the fragments she is given. An open can of Folgers, a carton of eggs on the counter, the faint scent of toast. Breakfast. Has she eaten? She cannot recall. Well, does she feel hungry or full? Hungry, she decides. And here is the miracle of 5 white eggs nested in a foam carton. She can almost taste the satiny yellow of the yolks on her tongue. Go ahead, she tells herself. Eat. When her husband Dimitri comes into the kitchen carrying the dirty breakfast dishes, she is poaching more eggs. What are you doing? He asks. She notes the dishes in his hands, the smear of dried yolk in a bowl, the evidence that she has eaten already, perhaps no more than 10 minutes ago. I'm still hungry. In fact, her hunger has vanished, but she says it nonetheless. Dimitri sets down the dishes and takes the pan from her hands, sets it down on the counter also. His dry lips graze the back of her neck, and then he steers her out of the kitchen. The wedding, he reminds her. We need to get dressed. Elena called from the hotel and she's on her way. Elena is here? She arrived late last night, remember? Marina has no recollection of seeing her daughter, and she feels certain she couldn't forget this. Where is she? She spent the night at the airport. Her flight was delayed. Has she come for the wedding? Yes. There is a wedding this weekend, but she can't recall the couple who is marrying. Dimitri says she has met them, and it's not that she doubts him, but... Now who is getting married, she asks. Katie, Andre's girl, to Cooper. Katie is her granddaughter, but who is Cooper? You'd think she'd remember that name. We met him at Christmas, Dimitri says, and again at Andre and Noreen's a few weeks ago. He's very tall. He is waiting for some sign of recognition, but there is none. You wore that blue dress with the flowers, and they had salmon for supper, he prompts. Still nothing. She sees a ghost of despair in his eyes. Sometimes that look is her only hint that something is missing. She begins with the dress. Blue. A blue flowered dress. Bidden, it appears in her mind's eyes. She bought it at Penny's. It has a pleated collar, she announces triumphantly. What's that? His brow furrows. The dress, and branches of lilac flowers. She can call up the exact shade of the fabric. It is the same vivid robin's egg as the dress worn by the lady in blue. Thomas Gainsborough, portrait of the Duchess of Beaufort. She packed that very painting during the evacuation. She remembers helping to remove it from the gilt frame and then from the stretcher that held it taut. Whatever is eating her brain consumes only the fresher memories, the unripe moments. Her distant past is preserved, better than preserved. Moments that occurred in Leningrad 60-some years ago reappear, vivid, plump and perfumed.
So after hearing that then, do we need to share differently? Or sorry, let's have a look. Talking to myself. Sorry. Yeah, perfect. Okay, so I'm just going to give you 3 little slides now that give you some of the analysis, which shouldn't be called preliminary anymore. It's now published. But so basically what we did is we did a year-long coding where we compared, 2 independent coders, and we looked at the different responses of the different groups. So when we were looking at this one, where the reader is attributing a feeling to the character with dementia, and all of these codes are people with dementia. And Andy says she's trying so hard in her own mind to remember things. She's looking into his eyes and she can see the despair in his eyes. And it's a horrible feeling to be like that. So it really brought out that sense. And they said that is what it's like. And they often talked about how they would say, I'm away now, but actually I worry about the impact on my family. But it wasn't, I would never want to give you the impression that there was anything kind of depressive or anxious amongst that group, that they were really quite enjoying the process of talking about dementia in this way. Then the next code I'm really pulling out because it is Naomi, who spent a lot of the time in the sessions going, gosh, this is so great. I wish I had this to explain to my daughter or to explain to my doctor or whatever. And she said, look at the example. She said, whenever she was given gentle sort of reminders, so she's like advocating for Marina. She's really saying Marina needed a bit of help. This fictional character needed a bit of help remembering. And actually, when she got the hint to help her remember the dress she was wearing, and all of a sudden brought that memory back, and she could recall in detail the dress, and that in turn stimulated another memory of when she'd worked. So she's talking about how giving a little prompt was really, really useful. And then the last one I'm going to look at is this one I find fascinating because I think it gives you really good insight and understanding into what it's like to live with dementia. Danny says, yeah, the way she had that time slip, you know, when she couldn't remember whether she'd had breakfast or not in the extract. He said, yesterday evening, that same thing happened to me. But I was out here from the kitchen where I am now, out to the hallway, and my daughter's dog was there and wondered how he got there. And she said, he came up with me the time I came up to make sure you took your tablet. But I don't remember nothing about it. But he can tell you the next day that he had this time slip. And I just thought that was really, really interesting. And other people have found this with people with dementia and reading, is that they can completely engage in the process at the time. So what if they don't remember it? If it's a pleasurable experience at the time, that would be what I'd say. So what are the strengths and limitations of this approach? I can see by the faces in the room, there's a bit of skepticism. There's not many arts and humanities people here. When you give this talk to humanities scholars, they come up and hug you at the end. It's not going to happen today. So, so the strengths are, I think, fictional characters are a really interesting way into developing a more meaningful public discussion about dementia. That's the level I think it's most useful at, particularly if it's put into the hands of people with dementia who can say, actually, yeah, that's a good way of explaining how I feel. And that's happened again and again. There was one character they all hated and said was useless, and we just had to say no. And he cheated on his wife at the start of the extract, and they just hated him. So like, it isn't like it always works. So the good stuff works. So I think that fiction could fill a really important gap there. It reaches a much wider audience than the paper that I've written, you know, who's going to read that? And the character's personhood is maintained. So it's potentially empowering for people with dementia and their carers. Of course, the limitations are that it's not real life testimony, and it should never be put forward as real life testimony. But it could be inaccurate. But we did a huge amount of work, which I said could be another presentation, working out which were the best extracts with lots of different kind of criteria. So I think that these fictional accounts are popular. So we've got to look at them. They're part of the public discussion. Even if they are unreliable, if they were completely unreliable, they'd still reveal a lot, as Betank says, about the demented other. Where do we put people with dementia within our public narrative? And it's potentially useful, particularly well-chosen extracts are potentially useful in training a range of carers of people with dementia. I mean, the social workers found it really useful to be able, their social work students, to be able to talk about things without upsetting someone, because it was a fictional character they were talking about. So that is my talk. I've given you kind of a sweeping overview of a bigger project, but I hope it was useful.
I have it's not a question. It's just, I'm not from humanities, but I thought that was brilliant. And we've done some research looking at helping people living with dementia get to sleep at night. And the enjoyment from very short stories is enough. People find it really helps.
So you found the same thing? That's really interesting.
But they also really like haiku, and a member of our team wrote some haiku. And they went down really well. It's something about how, I can't think of their timing or how.
Yeah, the rhythm, and it's just, yeah. That's really interesting, because also I think as well, there's so much brilliant literature and poetry and everything. It's just a matter of facilitating access, isn't it? And you know, why wouldn't you? Why would you lose pleasure in things like that? I find that very uplifting, that people got pleasure out of literature still and stories.
I was going to say, because I also found something similar in my research, because I was trying to find out what people knew about dementia, and that ranged from people living with dementia, and it was just like cognitive function and aging studies. So there's a selection of those people. And when they stated what they knew, a lot of the people who really felt they had got a grasp of things were people who listened to a storyline in Emmerdale. So it's a similar sort of, or you know, or an equivalent.
So the
it's
power of
less
the
about-
narrative to keep people,
Exactly. So
yeah.
it's less about, you know, reading stories, but listening to stories or watching something. Maybe I think they're doing something in EastEnders now, but they might have to think, well, if they remember from the news, it was very, very obscure, but characters and backstories. which is what
That's so
we
interesting. We
talked
should
about.
join forces on that. Because I felt that too. That was my gut instinct was, so the linguists are really interested in all the different, you know, the different types of metaphor used and everything. But I thought it was the characters. Because I felt like they could really, we all started talking about these characters like Marina, like they were real people in the room, you know. So it's something about characterization that's worth looking at further,
They've got
isn't it?
an investment in the character.
Yeah. It's a human nature as well, isn't it? To, you know, we like to believe in something in that sense.
So my talk later on, I'm not going to give you a hug now, but yeah, it's definitely, we do need to actually.
It's actually happened.
But we do need to actually sort of look, you know, it's really refreshing to hear about work which actually brings in literary studies and you know, tries to use some of the paradigms that you've got in different disciplines to look at stuff which is still, the majority of it's still quite medicalised.
It is.
So yeah, that's something.
What they actually said, what people with dementia said, was that they would love to continue to do this kind of reading groups, and Jane is following up with more, but not on the subject of dementia, of course, which is a great idea. Of course, we were looking at dementia fiction, but of course you could do it on any subject. I think, you know, the way often when you're doing a project, there's an accidental innovation, and I think the accidental innovation there was doing it online and then having to play so they had to print it out, I should have said as well, and they could listen. And having a number of different ways of engaging with something. But the listening thing I found really interesting, and the short extract, and that backs up exactly what you found too. Did you have a comment, Jennifer? Yeah.
I wondered if you did any work at all with paid carers, because donkeys years ago, when I was a social worker, one of the residential homes decided to have a social worker on the staff. You know what I'm going to say. I was amazed that people didn't know that the residents had the most incredible history. We had the most fascinating residents when you started listening to their experience. And yet the staff, maybe because they were busy, but they didn't realise that some of the people, or all the people in different ways, were extraordinary.
Of course they are.
And simple writers.
Yeah.
You know, and some had had these.
Well, this is the next project now that Paul Nash and I are dreaming up. Well, Paul's dreaming it up. So, you know, Paul used to work here in Swansea, and he's now in America, and we've written a book together. But he wants to do this thing called Vignettes of a Lifetime, where we gather up people's stories, because anybody who works with older people know that's just absolutely fascinating. And you cannot get that without having lived that long time. You just don't have the perspective.
I feel like we've got some questions in the chat.
Just make it,
There's no minutes there.
vignettes and anecdotes, which aren't very often sort of used in terms of so-called serious kind of academic work around dementia. But I found that actually there's a real validity in using those kinds of forms as well.
Yeah, just something that you can engage with easily, because you have to live with, there's plenty of people have to live with dementia long before we find a cure, you know, so we do need to have some kind of process, don't we? Is it just people saying that they couldn't hear the recording or something, is it?
Oh, there's no questions online.
Yeah.
You know, you said about how the blue dress sparked off and
Sorry, could you be a bit louder? I couldn't hear you.
the blue dress sparked off a different. Did the readers find that there was certain things that actually helped spark off the actual memory they were talking about? Or were there objects that had to relate to?
They would say it's not. There was one lovely quote that I know I used in the paper, which was one of the men said, there was a lovely metaphor of a sailing ship and the journey, and he said, oh, I could just sit there with the character, this character, I can't remember which one it was, I think it was the guy I quoted, and he said, I could just sit there, be happy, Martin, that was it, I'd be happy in his company, and he has this kind of idea of dementia being this journey and being a ship that's kind of going up and down in the waves, and he just really engaged with it. But that was really engaging with the metaphor. You know, so it was all very abstract. I was amazed how, because it was quite abstract, but you know, really good writers, they can make things feel so real because they bring out your feeling as well as your cognitive, you know. Sorry. You can see her.
I'm trying to hide.
She
There you
just
go.
her glasses now. Okay.
Well, thank you for that, Gemma. That was brilliant. We'll have to chat some more about that later, and I will give you a hug later, Gemma. Okay, what are you going to do? Well,
Can I ask a quick question?
yeah, sure.
I've read a couple of the books, but I couldn't see them all from you. Will we have slides? So I'd like to.
Well, you know what you have is the open access paper has a table in it with all of the books. in it.
Okay.
So that's probably the best way for people, because you can get exact reference then of, you know, who wrote it when and where it was
All
published.
like,
And that's 12 books.
yeah.
Does it tell you which ones are not working from? We don't need to. The good ones in the study, because there was, I mean, there's some more real ones. But there was one that lays down. Oh, yeah, that's the wilderness, all the little people have got, all the real.
Yeah, is it okay if we share the slides as well on our website with the.
But you get more, of course you can, but you get much more out of the.
Get the link and then.
Yeah.
send you out for-
Yeah, that.
Yeah, we'll find the link to the paper and then we can share that as well later. So next up, I'm delighted we've got Gareth and Sharon from National Museums to talk about their work, Museums Inspiring Memories. So I'm going to hand over to you.
What you don't fall of the way.
I will. There we are. Hello, everyone. And really wanted to introduce ourselves first. So my name is Gareth, and so my role is as the Dementia Voice Lead for Amgueddfa Cymru, or formerly known as National Museum Wales. So for those who don't know who we are as an organisation, we are a family of 7 national museums across the country. So that's the most local to here, the National Waterfront down near the docks, St Fagans, National Museum Cardiff, Big Pit, which is a National Coal Museum. We have the National Wool Museum in Drefach, Belinda, near Carmarthenshire, National Slip Museum in Llanberis, and finally the National Roman Legion Museum in Caerleon, just east of Newport. And to give you some context around who we are as an organisation, we have over 600 members of staff. We have over 1.8 million visitors a year. And beyond our physical sites, we also have about 5 million objects in our collection, which is kind of relevant to what we're going to be speaking about as well. And before we get into the body of what we're going to talk about, just say thank you very much for inviting us here to give a bit of flavour of what we're working on. So in the next 20 or so minutes, we'll be covering looking a bit more of our work through the lens of Museums Inspiring Memories, which is the project that I'm dedicated to and that Sharon is working on as well. And we'll also be including pieces of work which are done outside of the project, but which also contribute to the aspirations of Museum Inspiring Memories as well. And especially through providing opportunities for creatively aging as well. So inspiring creativity and learning for life is one of Amgueddfa Cymru's 6 commitments until 2030, for which we'll be working with people and communities across Wales through our collections, our public programmes and partnerships. And as said in our strategy, and I'll stay online if you did want to have a look at it, but we say, we learn as much from people and communities as they do from us. And together we can use Wales' collections and our museum settings to develop new ways of learning. And we also say that our museums and collections are an inspirational learning resource for everyone. And through collaboration with partners, we'll create new opportunities and resources for communities and adult learners. And that by working together and sharing experiences, our museums and digital spaces will provide a place where everyone can be creative. So what myself and Sharon will be speaking to in some more detail now is just one of many projects across Amgueddfa Cymru that forms part of this commitment. And in this particular case, Museum Inspiring Memories is focused on those affected by dementia. So the project itself is a partnership project between us and Alzheimer's Society Company. It has been funded by the National Lottery Community Fund for 3 years. We're now into year 2, so it's going on until late 2025. And its purpose and aspiration is pretty simple, and that being to work with people affected by dementia. So of course, that means people living with dementia, unpaid carers, care sector and health sector staff, but also heritage sector colleagues and different communities and organisations across Wales to kind of establish how can we best use those 7 museums and our collections to benefit the health and well-being of people affected by dementia. So in terms of the individual pieces of work within the project, there are 4 main pieces of work. So we have by now established our Dementia Voices and Heritage Group, which is made up of people affected by dementia, heritage sector colleagues from different departments and partner organisations. And this is and will continue to shape our work, and each member will in a way act as a bit of an advocate for the benefits that can come from engaging with our heritage and cultural spaces and opportunities. And with our group, we are currently developing a training session for heritage and cultural sector members of staff, really to upskill our ability in being able to provide all those affected by dementia when they come to one of our sites, to provide those visitors with a positive experience when coming to one of our museums. And following that, which we're hoping to launch in the new year, we'll move on to developing a support package for unpaid carers and care sector staff, with the purpose of building confidence in using museum resources with those that they care for. So this piece of work really came from an identified barrier where people either felt unaware of what we have in terms of accessible resources and spaces and facilities, but also the people told us they lacked confidence in engaging with the resources that we have available, at times kind of based on an assumption that museums are only for those equipped with historical knowledge, which is something we look to really to address.
Call came to this room, so anything not working? Seems to be working.
And finally, the group will also work with us in developing a sustainable program of activities, which we look to launch next year, not only at our museums, but also hosting opportunities out in the community, because I'm sure many of us can already understand the complexities around transport, and particularly for those who are residents in care homes, for example, and who are patients within hospital settings. What can we do to take our museums and collections out to them to maintain that sense of connection to the national collections? So what is really exciting about this particular program of activities is that, of course, it gives us the possibility of us as a group, and with the piece of work mentioned, in making these activities as creative as possible, using new as well as tried and tested methods to share the stories that we tell at our sites through our collections with communities, and sharing the benefits that come from engaging with those spaces and when those opportunities people affected by dementia is possible. So to give some context as to what we're talking about, I suppose, what those activities could be, we have gathered an example of one activity that has already been delivered over the past year at each of our 7 sites. So this is at St. Fagans, and for those who have been, you know, there's quite a forested and gardened area as well. So most recently in September, our colleague Loveday, who leads on the health and wellbeing work at St. Fagans, so she relaunched our seasonal walking groups for those affected by young onset dementia from a hospital quite local to the museum called Landock. And Ian, who is a member of our learning team at St. Fagans in the top right photo, he led a walk around our forested and gardened areas at the museum, speaking to the group about the various trees, the plants, their properties and historical uses. And the walk lasted for probably about an hour and was followed by some tea and coffee and, of course, cake. And when asking the group how the experience made them feel, they said, you know, it was relaxed, and that being outdoors certainly makes a difference, and that there are so many things that stimulate your mind and the senses. So I'll just pass on to Sharon now for the next few slides. There you go, Sharon.
Okay. I just noticed your Kermit socks, Gareth. I was working to that. We had a conversation about Kermit yesterday, so that's for the occasion. Okay, so I'll just talk about a few, just to give Gareth a little rest, a few of our sites. So moving a bit more further west, earlier this year we held a MIMS, which is our kind of short acronym for Museums Inspiring Memories, consultation day at the National War Museum, which you can see up on the screen there. Situated in the lovely little village of Drafach-Falindra, in the Tavy Valley. And, you know, it's a bit of a trek to get there, you know, it takes some kind of effort, but it's well worth a visit. And if you haven't been, you know, it's probably one of our lesser known kind of museums. You've been?
Fantastic, yeah, but I live in not far.
Oh, well, yeah, but it's certainly, you know, you've got an endorsement there. It's fantastic. It's well worth the journey. So what we had here, it was kind of part consultation day, part activity day, giving us a chance to try different things out, to talk to people and listen to people as well. We had residents from a local care home and children from a local school who came and met, and in the morning we had these beautiful conversations over museum objects. And I don't know if you can see any of the objects on the table, but quite, you know, domestic things, things that people will recognise. We tried to theme them this summer around celebration. There's this beautiful pair of gold shoes we have in our collection. Tell you what, they're tiny. If they fitted me, they wouldn't be in the collection anymore because they'd be in my house. But you can see, you know, a toilet roll at the front here. So things that lots of people recognise, can talk around, can engage around. So these conversations across the generations that were emerging were just fantastic. In the afternoon, we did a peg loom workshop, which you can just see here, which is just a really simple way of kind of weaving, supported by our older volunteers. And at Drafach, the older volunteers there are really vital to the running of the museum. The museum couldn't operate in the way it does without these volunteers. We've got two separate, I won't say factions, two separate groups. They're lovely. We try not to get them on site at the same time, because I think everybody thinks the museum, quite rightly so, is their museum. There's this big sense of ownership and connection, which is great because some of those people, you know, they've worked in that industry, they've worked in that specific mill, the Cambrian mill there. So, you know, they're great, but, you know, the Christmas do, we keep them in separate sides of the room. Next project, well, there's a beautiful dye garden, which you can see just at the bottom here, and the plants there are used to create natural dyes for dyeing the wool, dyeing the fabric as well. This garden is being expanded as part of a project now. We're currently in the phase, we're about to go out, start, you know, talking to the community, having these community conversations about what that meadow project, it's going from a garden to a meadow, so what the meadow project should look like. And I think it'd be really interesting, you know, to keep those going and keep a way of increasing engagement with the museum as well. So really exciting and quite, oh, I was going to push your laptop button then. Fantastic. One of the ideas as part of the meadow is to generate or create a bench, a friendship bench, like the one you see here. This is a National Slate Museum in Llanberis, so in the north of Wales. They've recently launched a meeting group called Dementia Friendly Fridays because they meet on Fridays. It'll build on previous work at the Slate Museum with a key partner, Dementia Active Gwynedd, and I know lots of you will, you know the wonderful work that they do. And this partnership, you know, is vital to us in the north. You can just see a snapshot of some of the sessions that have happened before. This one at the top is a rug making session. And the idea is with the new group, the Dementia Friendly Fridays group, is that people can participate in hands-on. So it might be rug making, it might be, you know, hands-on cookery, baking, that kind of thing. Cleaning the brasses in the chief engineer's cottage, which is a really popular one. I can remember having to do that for my nan as a child. I hated doing it, but now, you know, really engages people. People love it. And there was an intergenerational project with a local care home and a primary school, Ysgol Dalbadan, to create this friendship bench. So they came together with an artist, Ellen Williams, and they really thought about, you know, their area, their museum. What did it mean to them? You know, what are the kind of iconic things they relate to? They think about related to the slate industry. And they came up with hundreds of designs, and Gareth and I went away there that day and saying, how on earth is the artist going to, you know, translate this into a bench? As you can see, it's visually really appealing, it's nice. So the idea is that people will sit and have conversations across generations, you know, with friends, and this will be a focal point for that at the museum. So moving on to Big Pit, I'm going to talk a little bit about Big Pit's intergenerational group, the BIG, notorious BIG. They meet on a monthly basis. The group's been running for about 5 years, 6 years now. They participate in a range of activities. It's people of all ages. Sometimes it's the local early years setting, local schools, local care home, just residents, individual residents that come along. And they do arts and crafts. There might be a bit of historical research. It's really interesting to have the you know, cross-generation conversations about historical events in living memory. And I remember an amazing one about the miners' strike. So a lot of the children came in not knowing anything about the miners' strike, but went away having spoken to people who went through that, you know, and it affected them personally. This shows a recent project by the group whereby they visited the kind of Cenotaph War Memorial, the Blaenavon Workmen's Hall, the Miners' Institute. They did some research jointly about the names that were on the cenotaph, sorry. Some of the children found out that they had family members whose names were on the cenotaph, which was quite amazing. They went home and did some research. They planted then the names, everybody was assigned a name or a few names from the cenotaph to represent on crosses for Remembrance Sunday. So it kind of personalized the names and brought them to life. And then the children, you see just on the top there, planted over 200 crosses in the memorial garden around the cenotaph then for Remembrance Sunday. They also worked together, old and young, to create these poppies made from paper plates, but quite visually effective. And you could see the Workmen's Hall, you can see that picture at the bottom, decorating the Workmen's Hall then for Remembrance Sunday. But our dementia group, this is our new Big Pit dementia group as well. So they did the same activity and kind of fed into it. And it was just fantastic, you know, to see everybody working together. Not just that, but they were having discussions about kind of current world events and what was going on and what happened in their lives. So a range of things, you know, from one kind of small focus. National Museum Cardiff, we've been working with Age Cymru to provide culture club sessions. This is a new project for over 50s in Cardiff and the Vale of Glamorgan. And the idea really is that volunteers accompany people to participate in museum visits. So somebody who's quite maybe, you know, reticent about going out on their own, who'd love to visit museums and other places, but would like somebody to do it with. So it's matching up those people. So it's about building confidence and making new friends and increasing self-esteem. The Culture Club activities have included so far, and the hope is it'll be rolled out right across Wales eventually, but starting in Cardiff and the Vale, have included gallery visits. And I have to apologise, if you've been to the art galleries in National Museum Cardiff, we've got some wonderful galleries, some wonderful collections. I don't know why I picked this picture. It really doesn't represent us. So, you know, don't judge us on the photograph I included. I'll have to change that for next time. But the feedback has been immense. You know, people saying they felt secure, it felt good to have somebody with them to do things that they wanted to do, that they used to do, you know, individually, but have lost that confidence in doing. So we've given them the friendly face, really. And at Cardiff as well, National Museum Cardiff, we've also a good relationship with Re-Engage, who used to be Contact the Elderly. And I'm really glad that they've kind of rebranded or renamed themselves, because I never thought that was a good name. And they bring people in to our museums on a monthly basis. We have tea and cake, talk about a range of topics, participate in hands-on activities, art activities, writing activities. Sometimes it's just a wander around the galleries to see new exhibitions, temporary exhibitions, but it really works. So I'm going to hand back to Gareth, who'll talk about one of our other sites.
Yeah, of course. Right. I do, but I forgot to actually introduce Sharon. So Sharon Ford is the Health and Wellbeing Programme Lead for the Amgen Company, but also the Learning Manager of Big Pet. And Sharon really began this work a number of years ago through things like the Big Pet Dementia Friendly Underground, which started back in 2017. So the work that we're doing through this project really is building on work that's been taking place at the museum in some way, shape, or form for the past 6 or so years. So I'll just find my place. So, as part of World Alzheimer's Month, I'm sure most of us know that would have been back in September, we welcomed a local group that supports those affected by dementia to join us at the Roman Legion Museum in Caerleon to take part in a few activities. And as you can see from here, those both inside and outside, so taking advantage of the different environments that we have. So the inside part in the bottom left-hand corner, so that took place in our reconstructed barracks room, where Sam, the learning officer on the right-hand side, where the group could handle replica Roman items like swords, daggers, chainmail and armor and helmets and things like that. And following this, the group then went outside with Anna in the Roman garden, where she spoke about the herbs the Romans would have grown, and then the group then tasting and smelling some of the herbs that we grow in the garden activities area. And one of those living with dementia who joined us on the day said that it was fantastic and that there's a lot spent on research, but not so much on how to spend an afternoon, which I thought was quite a nice thing to capture. And at our most local to site here, as mentioned, the National Waterfront Museum. For those who are aware of that museum, who've been there, you'll know that we got a community garden in the courtyard called Graft. So to that graft, we welcomed a group of care staff and residents from Havanacoy, which is a care home in Llanelli, who spent a few hours with us. And I think to get to know each other over some tea and biscuits, that opportunity to enjoy ourselves as a group is important. Annie from Shared Plate, which is a community kitchen based in Mumbles, supported the visit, and she led a group on a bit of a tour of where we grow vegetables in the garden, before then picking some potatoes together. And you can see the amazing plate of food that we all cooked and enjoyed together then afterwards. And after that, the group enjoyed some flower bashing, which sounds a bit odd, but it is done by putting in some particularly oily and colourful flowers in some fabric, bashing them with mallets, and then was to release the oils and the colours, which then dyed the fabric in terms of the group then had some fabric to take away with them at the end of the afternoon. And then finally, which is, I suppose, our additional site, but isn't one of our 7 museums. So this is the National Collection Centre. So to finish off, we recently invited a group of centre staff and users from day centres across Cardiff, as well as a family of people affected by dementia, for a tour of our National Collection Centre, which sits just north of Cardiff on the way to Pontypridd. And it's where we keep our items which aren't being displayed, such as our engines, our vehicles, and some other huge pieces, I suppose. So led by Kerry, who you can see on the left-hand photo, who's our curator of Cole. So the group really enjoyed a bit of an introductory tour of the centre before then having a good conversation with Mark and John, who are 2 of our conservators based at the centre. And one unpaid carer told us that we had a great time and the day was lovely and filled with hope. So the possibilities really are almost endless as to what we could host when we think about that programme of activities next year, notwithstanding the stuff that we're already doing now in terms of piloting the work. And we really look forward to working with that Dementia Voices and Heritage group to try new things, build on what we already know and learn, and to use what we have as a family museum to provide those creative opportunities, to support those needed creative outputs, and to hopefully encourage those who are yet to engage with us to give us a go and to find out more about what we can offer, really. So that's it in a nutshell. That's why I say thank you very much for listening to us. I'm happy to take any questions if there are any.
I wondered, I'm always interested as I'm involved with a community group. I always wonder how you get over the barriers, because when we're getting people together, you know what I'm going to say, transport. So you have to think about bus fares, taxis. who's carers? We have to think about how we're going to pay for the carers to be covered. Then we have to think about things like food. And it becomes quite complex actually, but if you want to gauge with people, and then sometimes we have to think about translators, and sometimes we have to think about acoustic. And I'm always interested, because you could see I write funding bids as well. How do you manage to be so, inclusive of everybody? And do you have that in your budget? Is your money came from the lottery?
But just to say, at the moment, we're really lucky because we do have that lottery funding to underpin this work. So all the consultations, the outreach and everything we've done, bringing people into our sites, we've been able to be more considerate in a way and cover those needs because the funding is there. And what we hope will come out of the project, at the end of the 3 years, is some kind of innovative and different ways or ways we can address those issues. But I mean, transport we're finding is the biggest one. We've been out to wonderful community groups in communities across Wales, and they're so keen to come to our museums, but they just can't because there's no accessible transport. And it's really sad to see because you kind of stimulated that engagement and you then had to leave it there. Anything you want to say?
No, I suppose it's for those times when we aren't able to provide support with transport. Obviously, we have financial funding there to do it where possible. But if that's not possible, as much as we can, we want to replicate the opportunities that we can host in the museum, taking them up to community settings. And with that, of course, we completely understand and appreciate the need for a trusted and known space and a familiar space. So as much as we can, we want to emulate what we can do inside as much as outside. And that goes for also care homes. And also, most recently, we took our handling collection over to a few wards across Singleton and Talbot hospitals. So that is part of our learning, is how can we facilitate and replicate as much as what we do inside in different environments outside as well. But yeah, in terms of the funding and the lunch, that is part of National Lottery funding. So what happens beyond that, I'm not entirely sure, but that was part of our original budgeting because we recognise the importance of having those things.
I will say, just go back to the Blaenavon intergenerational group, intergen group. We've had funding from Western Power, or now National Grid, to support that group from its very inception, because they liked, the aims and the impact of the group. In return for that, we promote their priority services register. People getting on the register, vulnerable people. So if the power is cut, that they'll be the first people who are kind of supported and dealt with. So it's a nice kind of win-win situation for us there, but that's not to say, that's going to happen right across the board.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, seven fantastic sites that you've got in the National Museum. Will you be sort of like using this work as a model that you can use or to try and export it into the other local museums that you've got in Wales? Because there's lots of them in Wales which are part of the National Museum as well.
Yeah, well, in many cases, a lot of local museums have, in some ways, a bit further down the path than we are in terms of their connection with the local community, but also in terms of the Dementia Voice and Heritage Group, we have representatives on that group of people working in local museums. And with that, the training package, for example, that we're producing, we've been quite explicit in that is going to be a piece of work once we launch it, that we not only develop and deliver in-house and give and develop and deliver to staff across different departments, but that we also make it available for local heritage organisations as well, local museums, to take that from us and to deliver, I suppose, and to personalise it in that capacity, to make it available to their staff as well, so that with the National Lottery funding, once we're developing, delivering things across Amgueddfa Cymru, that it also benefits the wider dementia programme across the heritage sector across Wales. So that's how we're hopefully, and I should probably drop a note that most recently, we didn't quite work with local museums, but local museums as well as Amgueddfa Cymru worked on the same project called House and Memories Cymru app, which was an app developed by National Museums Liverpool over the past few years. But last month, they launched hundreds of items of Welsh content onto that app. So we, together with 13 local museums across Wales, contributed to that, and now that's launching out there for use, which again will be another way of getting other company collections as well as local museum collections across Wales together, hopefully benefiting the wider community. But in terms of the project, developing stuff and then sharing it across the country.
That was fascinating and great to see all the, I didn't realise quite how many different projects were going on within them. I was wondering if you could say a bit more about the intergenerational and how, in particular, the care home and school groups, and how easy or hard it's been to set up those. Were they already connected, or did you connect them?
I think with the Blaenavon one, it was easier, I suppose. It's a smallish community, 6,000 people. There's lots of, everybody knows everybody in relationships anyway. So the relationships were there, so it did make it easier. There were the barriers, spoken about earlier, which don't go away, even in a small town, those barriers are the same. What was good was, I think, stimulating those relationships, because even though people live in the same town and know each other, they don't necessarily, sit down together and share experiences or talk to each other or anything. And I have to say, real friendships have come from those relationships. It's good to see, if one of the older residents is away, there's real concern about where they are, why they're not here, are they ill, that kind of thing. And also, people have met up outside of the group as well. So, the impact goes beyond the actual, every time the group meets in that setting. But yeah, it's not been too difficult. I think in some of our sites, we're just starting it now at in Llanberis and in Drvar. Different, a little bit more challenging sometimes, I think. Is, the location of our museums can be a challenge sometimes. The perception of, oh gosh, we don't want to go in there in the winter, it's going to be freezing cold. Let's stay in a nice warm environment. So I think with our other sites, we're just starting to look at those challenges now and how we kind of surmount them. Would you say?
I definitely. Yeah, I think our relationships with them since I've been involved with the project since last July, I think when we have approached different homes and residential settings as well as health settings, I think we're definitely pushing at an open door. And in some ways, it's been us just raising awareness of the variety of options that we potentially could deliver with homes, with staff, with residents, that kind of probably surmounts the barrier that people sometimes have about the perception of what museums are, who we're suitable for, and what kind of things we look to deliver. So in some ways, it's really been we've been fulfilling a bit of something that people have been asking for. I know in some conversations I've had, particularly with some activities coordinators, that the activities that we want to develop with them, they're really excited to be involved, because they at times have been asking for greater variety of things that they can provide week in, week out. So they're seeing a product like this as an opportunity to provide that variety. So we've been able to push out that open door and develop on the relationships. And because we've had a good time on piloting activities before we launch them next year, we've had a good time to really develop strong working relationship that has only benefited the work. So it's definitely been a case of raising awareness of what we could do, and that then influencing how people want to get involved, and people actively engaging with us proactively, as opposed to us going out there ourselves.
I will say, though, the schools used to provide more of a challenge than they do at the moment because of the new curriculum. Previously, you were trying to work around, a set curriculum and fit in with what they were doing. Now they're outwardly looking for opportunities to be out in communities and to engage with people. So, it's a bit easier in that respect than it used to be, which was fantastic for us and for the work.
There's an online question, sort of like such an online. It says, can I ask how Gareth and Sharon advertised these events in the museum, and how they generated interest?
Oh, well, I suppose through, I'm not sure why I zoomed in. Through in terms of advertising it, we've really been networking as much as we can in terms of building up a partnership and an emailing list through which we can advertise. Of course, we have existing strong partnerships who we depend on, Alzheimer's Society being a major partner in the project, of course. So we've been relying on those that we already know, with the hope that each time we do reach someone new, it opens up new networks. So it's really been growing organically, and I suppose it's been trying to pinpoint who those local, not gatekeepers, but those who are local contacts that can share with their own networks. So there's it's constantly growing. We know that we need to get better and know more people, essentially. But it's kind of grown naturally, which is really quite nice. And it's, as long as we keep having those questions where people ask us, "Oh, I hadn't heard about this before," then that's great, because clearly something has happened since the last time that they now have heard about it. So our ask really to people who hear about the project is that they then go on and share it with those they know, or they may look on our website, they join our emailing list, get on newsletters, so that we can continue to grow that network. So I know that that's a barrier that many organizations have, but it'd be great to get this person to, if you wanted to, our email address, just to get more involved in the work, either as a participant or just to receive our communications.
Newsletters are pretty good, by the way.
Oh, thanks, Aaron. Yeah,
It's very
oh,
yeah, bilingual. It's sort of,
We can push some stuff out through the image network, send it to Leanne, who's the enabling research and facilitate, we can get stuff out to our
Also came from to pass
thank you.
website and all that and things.
We've been trying as much as we can with the newsletter and things like that to know that whilst, of course, the purpose there is to promote the project and what we're achieving and what we look to achieve, is to also communicate that we aren't the ones owning the work. So making sure that we dedicate a section within our newsletter, for example, to promoting local services. So the most recent one was Still Me, which is a group based in Nagaru on the campus, who are run by and support people affected by dementia. So we want to make sure that we use some of our resource to promote what's already going on, so that we complement as opposed to, to dominate the messaging. But that's, yeah.
I will say in some of the smaller communities, we've got those key people, the one person is like a telephone network. You get that one key person and then they'll tell everybody else, they'll ring around and tell their friends when they're going out to other meeting groups. And that's really useful as well.
Yeah.
Really useful.
Any more online questions? No, well, thank you both very much.
Thanks,
I
Dave.
think we're both very excited now. We're very excited now, I think.
So we can go to the those.
If I can get this to work again. Oh, go on. This is, this is not moving on, Marie. Oh, well. Will that just play by itself? Oh, no. Yeah, press it again. There's tea and coffee on there if anyone wants. We need to put the kettle on, we're after coffee.
Lovely to see you all. I recognise quite a few faces, so lovely to see you all again. And hello to everybody online. I'm going to talk a little bit about a project that we've been doing. A number of us are here today who've been involved in it, including Deb and Carol and Awen and Jennifer as well. And it is all about creating the climate comic with intergenerational groups. Now, I've got a few climate comics back there. People are welcome to take away with them if they would like to. So, without further ado, oh, how do I? Which button is it? Oh, there we are. Click on the mouse, sorry, on there. So this is the optic team. See who you can recognise on it that's in the room. My daughter thought this was me, but that's not. It's Charles. So we're an intergenerational, no, we're not. Well, we are, but we're an interdisciplinary group based in geography and here in the Centre for Ageing and Dementia Research. And of course, Laura, who's illustrated the comic and also done so much more than illustrate the comic. She's been really important throughout. Sorry.
He's not on camera.
Oh, sorry. There we are. Okay. And it's been funded. It was an approach call. Can't remember what that stands for, but it was funded through the University of Stirling as part of the Healthy Ageing Challenge. And it was a one-year project. So first of all, then, why did we want to do intergenerational climate change research and engagement? Well, there are many reasons, but one of the main ones, the main one, is of course that climate change is the single biggest health threat facing humanity. And it's an intergenerational issue. So while it's older people who might be more vulnerable today, it's the younger people who will be the older people of tomorrow. They will be most threatened in future as climate change and the impacts of climate change worsen in future. We also wanted to generate or explore solidarity, debate between generations, and facilitate knowledge sharing and exchange between generations as well. And we were interested in what sort of experiences the different generations had, and traditions, learning from each other, and visions for sustainable futures. So we're really interested in what people wanted from the future, what they thought the future might be like, and what they wanted from the future as well. And of course, there are various direct health and wellbeing benefits of connecting, working together, and particularly through being creative together. So there was lots of creativity during the workshop that we did as well. So how did we go about? Oh, why comics first of all, and then I'll say how we went about it. Oh dear, that's floating. Oh dear, that's floating as well. There's something gone wrong with the slides there, but I'll just talk about them instead. So plenty of reasons why we wanted to work with comics. Comics are images in sequence. So you can tell a story, you can see a story on a page. We might prefer to call them graphic novels, comics, the same sort of thing. But interestingly, the word comics actually can immediately put some people off. Somebody said at the EFO Steddfod, why are you doing a comic? Climate change isn't funny. And we had a conversation all around that. So comics don't have to be funny. They don't have to be about superheroes. People have written comics about all sorts. Here's just a couple of ones that are environmental, but there's lots of interesting comics about aging and dementia as well, that are worth a read. And the idea of comics is they are words and pictures, and you can do anything with words and pictures. They're particularly useful for exploring geographical issues like climate change, which need to be explored through space and time, because you can use various tools in the comics, panels, etc., close-ups of specific places, these sorts of things. You can focus on people and place and time all on one page. They're good for communicating complex ideas and prompting discussion, promoting learning, understanding, retention, and they basically provide a frame through which to think. The frames on the page provide a frame through which to think and a structure. And this, oh yeah, and they provide different ways to represent meaning. So at the moment, I'm giving a presentation, I'm a bit stressed. You can see the emanata coming out my head, you know, those wiggly lines. So you can put that on a page to show the sorts of feelings, things like that. And as I say, time and space, etc. One of the primary school pupils that we worked with said cartoons are for thinking about other things as well. So it's a really good way to think about other things. Interesting, I never would have thought this before, but when I was reading up on comics at the start of the project, comics can help you actually get into the shoes of somebody else, because cartoons apparently are easier to identify with because they're not so realistic. You can more easily think of yourself as that character because they're not as detailed, they don't look specifically like a person, apparently. So that's another interesting way that we can use comics to identify with people. And yeah, as I said, these two are definitely worth a look. So this did have a lovely arrow going from there to there, but it has not worked on this slide. But it shows, if we can imagine an arrow going through the project, months 1 to 2 to 8 to 12. We're currently about 14, month 14, so we have finished the project now. But I'll tell you a bit about what we're hoping to do going on from now. The blue, sorry, this really has been messed up on that. I don't know why. The blue shows the advisory group and how they participated throughout, and they have been essential to this project. In future, we would involve them right at the beginning when we're designing the project. That didn't happen, unfortunately, but they did help us design, for example, the workshops, what we did in the workshops, the activities, acted as bridge makers to communities, absolutely essential throughout. So what did we do? First of all, we set up the advisory group, then we held creative workshops, which I'll talk a bit about in a minute. And then we worked with Laura, the illustrator, to create this bilingual comic, which again, I can give you all a copy of if you'd like one. We've done lots of engagement with the comic and throughout the project as well. So we went to the Eva Steddfod, led by Awen, did lots of collage up there, spoke to lots and lots of people. It's a great event. It was in Mid Wales, where so it's the children's festival, isn't it? But they come along with their parents, grandparents. So there's lots of opportunity for intergenerational conversation. And we had an exhibition here in the Taliesin as well towards the end of the project. And of course, through the printed comics, we've been trying to do as much engagement with that as well. Also enabled by our advisory group. So for example, Jennifer had it at the Green Fair at the weekend, and it's sort of it's been getting everywhere, which is nice. And then we had a learning event at the end of the project as well. So the workshops then, the idea was that they'd be 3 hours long and involve surveys, objects, game, and a creative activity. In practice, we needed to be really flexible, and sometimes they couldn't be 3 hours long, which is that was essential to have to be flexible. So for instance, we worked with a primary school and a care home. 3 hour long session was not going to work. We broke it up over 2 days and 3 separate sessions, school and care home, school, and that worked nicely like that. The activities, we tried to give participants as much choice in what activities they ran, they wanted to do, and each workshop had 2 activities running. And these activities were a mobile interview, so a walking interview, for example, along a busy street in Swansea and along the front in Port Talbot. We did online mobile interviews, so this is using Google Maps to basically do a mobile interview, but online. We did a few of those. Alid gave a presentation about that the other day at the Healthy Aging Conference. We did some comic creation. So this was, we did this with the school. A storyboarding activity led by Carol, and the collage and cut-ups, which Awen will talk about in a minute. And then Laura worked her magic. She took the anonymised transcripts. We gave her some ideas of what we thought were interesting stories and themes, but then she created these amazing stories. Absolutely fantastic. Have a look and see what you think of the comic. One thing on the comic is we're about to print another load, so if anybody's got any comments, any criticism, anything, then please let us know, because in a week or so we're going to make a few changes and print another batch out. And we'd like to improve it where we can, if we can. So I'll just give you a couple of examples of how the creative activities led to the stories that were represented in the comic. So these are the mobile interviews. And this is where, so we use Google Maps to explore a place. So this was up in the valleys, and we walked via Google over this bridge, and somebody mentioned about the duck race that happens, and how the duck race in the last few years, there's been real issues because sometimes there's too much water and the ducks all get lost, get flooded, and sometimes there aren't any at all. And then Awen and Laura wrote some haikus to describe that. So that panel there came directly from that activity there, where we did this mobile interview. So Alid led that one up in here one. And as another example, the storyboards, which was held in the Busy Street workshop. One of the participants remembered pop bottling on the beach here at Langland, and we discussed how such ideas could inspire new forms of action. So Laura found this particularly interesting and developed it into one of the stories as well. And cut-ups and collage, are you going to talk about that? Shall I?
Yeah, I'll actually.
Yeah. So Awen will talk a bit about that. These came up a lot, didn't they? Yeah. So Laura created sketches of the stories, and then we commented on them, went back and forth with some of the advisory group a little bit, and again in future more of that would be great. This was a short project, so we had to be quite mindful of how long we spent developing it, especially as the workshops happened a little bit later than we'd hoped as well, due to various reasons. But yeah, so we developed the stories with Laura, a bit of flip-flopping between, and then she made them into the final versions. I should say as well, the style is based upon findings from a short survey that we did at the start of the project to find out what people thought would work in a comic. So we had 98 respondents to the survey who told us what they liked and didn't like in various different pictures that Laura provided. This is when we went to the ear. There's Alid and Awen there. Hundreds of people we must have engaged with. Difficult to know.
It's well, in that particular tent, the predominant tent, which is Swansea University, there's usually about 40,000 people.
A lot of people.
It's very, very busy. I think also just it's less corporate than lots of the other university offerings on the site. So there's tons of activities there for young people. And I was just wondering, but it was very intense,
especially on the days you were there.
it was very intense.
Yeah,
and just
yeah,
actually just you could feel that people wanted to talk about climate change.
Yeah,
and somehow once you engage with people, it was interesting just how much how many stories we heard from all different parts of work, about local level, about things that are going on.
And the age profile changes through the week, doesn't it? So it was busier with the
So it's
young people at the
kids
start,
and then it's sort of older kids at the end.
Yeah.
But you've got this steady stream of grandparents, parents
Yeah.
who are very, very still looking forward.
It's a great event,
or
isn't it?
tired. Yeah, but it's great. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's good.
Just don't go into the harp room. My daughter decided she wants a harp because we went and played the harp at the ears. This is the optic exhibition. Don't really need to say any more about that. That was over in the Taliesin, and we created a collaborative big comic that we've yet to analyse all this lovely data that we've got, but it's there to be analysed. And then we had the shared learning event, which involved a range of participants, some of whom are with us today. And we did some what were they called? Design sprints, which we'd never done before, to sort of think about ways that we could improve environments for ageing, drawing on ideas from the comic. Again, lots of lovely data to analyse from that soon. So what's next? Analyses, writing papers, doing more outreach. We're working with some more primary schools, still working with the care home to do some more outreach. We're hoping to be able to do an intergenerational activity pack. So building upon the climate comic, to go with the climate comic, to have a booklet full of activities that people can do intergenerationally. That's the idea. So we're hoping to work with, we're waiting to, if we've got the funding, but we're hoping to work with primary schools and care homes and various other, don't like the word stakeholders, various other interested people who will be co-developing that. And we're going to do a seminar with CADR in January. So really, really big thank you. I don't know if I've gone under time or over time. I can carry on talking. Am I about right? Okay. To everyone who's been involved, it's been a good year. Lots still to do though, I think. Please do get in touch. Do help yourself to a comic if you're here. If you're online and you'd like a comic, let me know. I can send you one. We've got a few left, and then, as I say, we're going to print some more. So we'd love any feedback about the comic too, so we can make it better when we print it again. And there's my granddad, poster child. There's a survey that's still open if anybody would like to take part in the survey. But in the meantime, any questions or comments or discussion points or anything at all? Thank you.
I was interested using the survey at the Green Fair on the Women for Resources stall, because Saturday and Sunday we actually had an awful lot of interest. And it was really, really interesting how easy it was to get people engaged. Because I was one of those who said, oh, a comic. But people of all ages got engaged. And on the Sunday when I was there, because a lot of our volunteers were international, it was really interesting to get the perspective of people who mainly came from Africa. And the commonalities with South Wales and the flooding and the issues. I thought there was so much that we had in common, and the discussions that generated.
The game, is it? The
You
game.
were just using starting off
Yeah.
with board game.
Yeah.
Because Carol had it all laminated, as you know, we were very efficient at
Yeah.
volunteers.
Yeah.
But it was really good to engage. It was good that we could engage through the game.
Yeah, the game, if anybody wants to see the game, I've got the game back there. Very simple, but effective, isn't it? But again, I think we can improve it more by changing some of the words maybe, because some of them are a bit more difficult, especially for young people, because some of them are remember, but surprisingly, young people will remember, they do remember things or remember memories or, so, but I think, It's been a bit of a saviour, has that game. Sorry, people who've heard this about a million times. When we went into the care home with the students, COVID had hit some of the team. So it was me with 12 students in a care home. The teachers were there as well, but obviously they didn't know a huge amount about the project. So how on earth is this going to work? The children led the sessions because they knew how to play the game. So the game was an absolute saviour, and it's so simple. But yeah, that was developed with the advisory group in the first pilot that we did. But yeah.
And that really helped up in Awen as well. We did obviously some of the collages that were created there, but it was essentially just as a primer, just to get people talking and thinking before you went into the main activity. It's standard pedagogic stuff, isn't it? But really, it was really good to have that as a backup. And I initially thought that wouldn't work up there, but it was good.
Yeah.
The objects were quite fun as well.
The objects, So yeah, I should have included that on there. I usually do at the beginning, don't I? So yeah, the icebreaker task at the beginning was a table full of objects, and some of the stories. I'm looking around for a comic. The first panel of the comic is Loz, one of our participants, holding a stone, and she was looking at this stone and say, well, online actually, looking at, we sort of adapted it for online, and what stories could that stone tell, if it could tell the stories. And there was a tractor and a lump of coal, which wasn't picked up by anybody, interestingly, but all sorts of things that people made sort of the most interesting links with that you'd never know about. So we had lots of things there that were just what we thought were totally random, but they'd pick up a teaspoon and say about what they talk about over a cup of tea with their friends, or whatever, prompted by this teaspoon and things like that. So yeah.
People would want to draw their own comic books.
Yeah.
So we've had an attempt at drawing our own comic books, some definitely more successful than others. Just to sort of prime people. Amazing artwork. Just be
yeah. It doesn't matter, does it?
No.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I don't know if there's any questions on that, but it's taken a phone.
Is there any way I can find it?
I think it's so interesting. My mind is like spinning of all the different things people do this. Is the basic idea to really get that intergenerational conversation going? That's the basic premise.
Yeah, I mean, the overarching aim is to improve environments for aging. But in order to do that, we need to know what people think. And to do that, especially around climate change, it's essential to get intergenerational conversation going.
Definitely. Now, it's so good, it's so beautiful. It's really interesting. We have a project called Faith and things that I'm not getting or anything. The Centre for Public Health, and the same call, you know. Yeah. And what they did was, so I did take part in some policy workshops they had. And what I found really interesting was they were talking about aging a bit, but then they had a lot of planners and environmental people were very involved, you know, that challenge. It was really well done, really interesting. It's something you get about Christmas. But what I found was it was like aging was kind of left behind a bit in the discussion. And I just think your method seems to have handled it very well, that you just by who you included with your advisory group is quite clever. Because I'm not sure that they handled it as well as that. You know, these projects are complicated.
Is it about climate change, I suppose?
No, it's about environment, sustainability and planning and all that kind of thing. And it's a brilliant project. I'm not critiquing the project at all, but I did feel when I was at the policy session that it just makes sense, like the urgency about climate change and sustainability and solutions means that they've kind of got a bit lost. The aging got a bit lost.
I think you're right actually with our project. The main way we did that was through who we worked with. Yeah. Because there wasn't a huge amount of prompting about, but it was, you know, what sort of stories. So those sort of stories came from, you know, the older people could tell stories from further back, obviously, and so, but yeah, we focused around climate change rather than aging as much per se, but through who we were working with. I think, yeah.
It's a different kind of project, but I just feel like it's quite hard because climate change is often set up as something that I know my kids have come home from geography lessons and they despair. But what's the point? You know, they're like depressed by it and anxiety. But then at the same time, the geography teacher says this happens. He's talking about physical geography, but not in a time frame that makes sense to humans or something, not within a human lifespan or something. So they're kind of really struggling with when is this awful Armageddon going to happen? Yeah.
That is a really good point that we've been grappling with, is about eco-anxiety, climate anxiety, whatever, you know, we want to call it. We have to try and pitch the comic right, because it's a very serious issue. People need to know, you know, that it's a very serious issue. But also, yeah,
so terrified that they're like,
yeah, but we don't want people to just close it because it's too much to think about. So it's kind of, it's getting that balance right. Again, I'd love any feedback on that, whether we've hit it right or whether it needs to be.
Did you have some here?
Yeah, sorry, I meant to put a load out. Yeah, there's loads back there. Yeah, please do.
Sort of focused on solution, and that was
Yeah.
the thing around intergenerational, is that there are often these, I would say, the practical solution. I think these are things, they're not massive things necessarily, but they are, you know, this is something we used to do, you know, and then we can continue. So it feel a little bit less that anxiety type things, because it's a case of, well, we've been here, this is what we used to do when we were young, we did these very practical type skills down, you know, I don't know, we use recycling sort of thing. So there's something about
but just by doing something that you're empowering yourself to not just be that rabbit. Because I do think that's the problem. And then you read, I think they're constantly scrolling and they're reading and they're finding like 2% of the population is responsible for everything. You know, it's been a very, you know, just nonsensical headline. So it's very disempowering.
We also found lots of things which were like common across worlds through the conventional time of the year. So things like which is everybody has, or quite a few people have that kind of memory of that happening.
Hi, Erin. We've got a couple of questions online. That's me. I'm up in the air. I'm just all around you. So we have a question from Paul, who is asking if you could please explain the cheese grater on the front page of the comic.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Awen can probably explain that better because he was there. Are you able to hear?
Yeah.
Can you hear that?
Basically,
Yeah.
The cheese grater was something that came up in one of these kind of preliminary activities where we were talking to quite a lively bunch of kids in Hirwaun. And Hirwaun is at the head of the valleys, and there's lots of things going on around Hirwaun. They're building a big road outside of it. They're cutting down trees, actually. There's also lots of wind farms in the area. And the kids just didn't have the word for pylons. So they described them as cheese graters. And that just stuck with us really. It's just, so, you know, we've kept, I think also with a comic, it's kind of important that you perhaps have that slightly surreal thing going on. You know, so the ducks, especially in the comic as well, I think there's a whole history of ducks being made into cartoons. So it was kids calling pylons cheese graters.
And it's just another way of getting people, because quite a few people have asked us that. It's just an in, isn't it, to get conversation going as well, I think.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. So Paul says he loves that. He also has a follow-up question. Do you envisage the comic being available on Amazon?
Well, so it will be available online for free. We're going to make the edits first, and then it will be online as a flip book, and we can post them. It won't be available on Amazon, unless we could work out a way to do it free on Amazon, but I'm not sure that we could. But Paul, please do send us your address and I'll send you some. We've got a couple left before we do another print run. But yeah, it's a good question as well. Thank you.
Thank you. And then we've got another question, final question from the chat, and I'll stop, I promise. Was there any mention of Climate Fresk, an activity exploring the various contributions to and effects of climate change?
Climate Quest, was that?
Fresk, F-R-E-S-K.
No. I'd like to find out about that. No, I don't know. Not heard of it. Climate Fresk.
Shall I ask Diana, who's asked the question, if she's available to come in and chat? That'd be a second.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
Hello, Marion.
Hi.
It's something I did a few months ago, quite an intensive exercise, actually,
Right.
but something that originated, I believe, in France.
Ah.
A small group of people, probably 6 to 8 for maximum effect. I mean, we were adults.
Yeah.
It really drew out all the interconnections, if I could put it like that, in climate change. And I just thought it might be something as a follow-on if you've ignited the interest.
Definitely. Thank you ever so much. I've written that down because that's the sort of thing we need to be looking at for ideas for the activity resources. So I'll definitely have a look at that. And any other games that people recommend as well that we could maybe.
You need a trained leader. I have to say that. You need a trained leader.
Right,
I can give you a name from the University of York if that would help.
Yeah, why not? I'll do you want, are you able to put it in the chat or?
Not off the top of my head.
No, that's fine. That's fine. If I tell you what, no, if I Google it and Google York, I should be able to.
She's called Abby something, but I can't remember her surname, unfortunately.
Okay, lovely. Thank you, Diana.
You have a question on there.
Only just to say that the university might be able to give you an ISBN number.
Got one.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
And also looking at it, it's downloadable.
It will be. Well, yeah. So we were going through the process of having it put online, and then we decided that we should make a couple of edits before we do that. Because we'd had a little bit of feedback, and we thought if we're going to make, Laura's got a bit of time to make some changes, so we thought we'd do that before we put it online.
Great.
But it will be. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
Right, so no more questions. Can we thank Marion for another great presentation? So I'm going to introduce you now to Awen, who was also on the Optic project, but he's going to talk about creative strategies using collage and cut-up. So I'll let you.
Okay. Yeah. Hi there. Okay. Yeah, I will be talking about some of the collages that came up through the Optic project as well. So and also just feel free to ask me questions during this session as well if there's anything that comes up, because I haven't practiced this much. But anyway, what I hope to do is just to give you an idea of some of the things that I've been able to develop, or some of the techniques, creative techniques that I've used over the last 4 or 5 years, either as part of my PhD, which was a PhD looking at dementia-friendly communities and sort of questioning the ideas around dementia-friendly communities, or as part of the Optic project. Now, I've used collages and cut-ups for this. And how do I go forward?
On this, just click on there.
Oh.
And then, yeah.
Oh, okay, there we go. Yeah, okay. So also, I mean, probably best to give you a bit of my background. I've got quite an eclectic background. I used to be a teacher over in the Basque Country in Spain for many years. My first degree was in English and history, which is kind of relevant to this because I did a lot of stuff around American literature, which will come into the story at some point. I then did an MA in English language and social linguistics. before becoming a projects officer, working in media, working for the BBC at one point, and then becoming a researcher for my sins. So I've been a social researcher, I guess, or social scientist interested in geography, gerontology. For the last 15 years or so, I did an MSc at Cardiff University, and really, I'm really interested in interdisciplinary sort of approaches in general. Also, probably during my PhD, I became a bit more of a geographer accidentally, and that's had an effect on the way that I think about things in terms of theory, in terms of being creative. So basically, hopefully now I'll give you a bit of a tour of what I achieved during my PhD and what I've been up to with the Optic project, specifically using things called cut-ups, collage, and other kind of experimental writing, such as spontaneous prose. Okay. Right. I still not got this yet. Sorry.
On the presentation.
Oh, there we go.
And then
Okay.
use those.
There we go. Right. Okay. So, as social scientists, as people who are involved in research, we're always being told that we should be making the familiar strange. I think that's one of the things that really comes up as a theme when you're developing yourself as a researcher. You know, you look at the social world, you're thinking, right, okay, how do we make sense of things? How do we find patterns, or how do we go against? How do we come up with original thought about the social world? So basically, this picture is of the writer William Burroughs, taken in Brecon, which is a market town in Powys, and where I did most of or some of the casework or the case study for the PhD. So yeah, my PhD, as I said, looked at dementia-friendly communities, and as part of the PhD, I did a lot of the kind of usual stuff that you do. So participant observation, interviewing, and I was involved with different activist groups, different networks around dementia for those 3 or 4 years doing the PhD. At the same time, as the PhD sort of accumulated lots of data, lots of stuff that came into it, I became a bit sort of anxious, and I think this happens a lot in PhDs. I became a bit anxious about how I was going to analyze it. You know, you can do things, you can do thematic analysis, you can take your data, you can sift through it, and you can find and code it. But I was beginning to get a bit anxious about how messy the whole thing was, because I'd collected photos, interviews. You know, as I said, I was spending a lot of time up in Brecon. So luckily for me, there were quite a few different opportunities in the geography department here at Swansea, where we were encouraged to think about writing about place and space. And in doing one of those seminars, that picture of William S. Burroughs, who is an avant-garde writer, who was an avant-garde writer from the US back in the 50s and 60s, somebody pointed me in the direction of that picture. And it's a long story, which you can read my PhD about. but basically that flight took me from thinking about how I would use the conventional methods that I had to analyze things for the PhD, into thinking about using some of the methods that avant-garde writers like William S. Burroughs and the Beat generation in general were using back in the 50s and 60s. Okay. And it turns out actually that they also were using methods from the 1920s. Really. So these were collage and cut up. So, and of course, I mean, making the familiar strange. When you're talking about research with people with dementia, we've got this strange dilemma as researchers in terms of our thing is to make things, you know, to make the familiar strange. But obviously, for people with dementia who are already living with it, the familiar has already become strange. So there's lots of sensitivities around as well using these methods with people with dementia. And in fact, I mean, it turned out in my PhD that really it wasn't appropriate for me to co-produce anything with people with dementia in that particular thing. There was negotiation with the group and the people who were in that group as to my role during the PhD. And really it was strictly a participant observation sort of role. So for the PhD, I've only used the collage and the cut-ups as a way of informing my own analysis. Okay, which is different from the work I did with Optic, where basically for the, you know, I actually got to do some co-production with people, which is fantastic. Okay, this slide maybe is a bit obscure, but basically, again, geography. Because I became this kind of accidental geographer, I was able to kind of access geography seems to have a lot more of a lively kind of social theory attached to it as a subject. And I think, you know, there are people in gerontology, in critical gerontology, such as Stephen Katz, who have tried to introduce more of these kinds of non-representational theories, for example, into geography. Affect is another theoretical turn, which perhaps, you know, has become a bit more popular, but generally these methods are a lot more popular and these creative methods are more popular in geography, it seems. So, okay. So cut-ups. Now cut-ups to keep it simple. Cut-ups really are a collage with words. So you take a series of texts and you quite literally cut them up and try to make something new out of them. So again, you're trying to make the familiar. In this case, I mean, I had 3 or 4 years worth of different amazing, sometimes quite funny headlines about dementia, which came up in mainly the Daily Express, has to be said. So it's mainly the Daily Express or the Daily Mail. Daily Express, you could virtually say every 3 or 4 days there would be something about dementia, and then every 3 or 4 days there'd be something about the royal family, and then it would be Brexit. So in this particular period, Brexit obviously was something that was there. So the idea with cut-ups is that it challenges some of the assumptions that you've got about language, because you are literally breaking up the text, trying to look for something new, some new meaning within that text. It uses things like randomization and juxtaposition, which is what you do in collaging as well. So when you put pictures together, it's the same thing, but it works slightly differently with language. And it's a fictioning technique, because you are creating a new possibility of a new kind of it stimulates the imagination. It's a new kind of imaginary. It can be new imaginary. You also end up with lots of yeah, got it. There we go. Okay. You end up with basically this is one of my cut-ups, which ended up in the PhD. As you can see here, you've got basically these are the headlines which I found with the Express, Daily Mail. I took these. I used 2 main methods. One was actually literally, you know, a printout where I took some scissors, cut them up, put them together, and then came up with, after some experimentation, trial and error, you come up with something which is some kind of prose poetry, where you find that actually, you know, you might find some kind of meaning coming out of that, which gives you some glimmer of something else which is possible from the headlines themselves. The idea here is to actually break through that discourse. This is what Burroughs did back in the 50s and 60s when he took, newspapers and did that. And the idea here is to actually sort of try and look for something new. So this one was, yes, these were, I came up with this sort of prose poetry at the end, which was kind of interesting. There's more than one method that you can use. You can fold in, you can take two very, very different types of text. So for example, I took my own field notes and I folded them in with information leaflets about how to live healthily with dementia. And again, you come up with some interesting poetry, which again, I'm not going to go into it too much here, but you can read in my paper that I published at the start of this year, and the PhD itself as well. So that's the cut-ups. Right. I also used collage. Basically, the collage came about in the PhD because I came to an impasse where I wasn't sure again what could I do with all this material that I'd gathered. So I decided to take a more artistic approach. This was during COVID as well, so I think that had an effect on the way that I actually thought at that time. And I ended up this particular collage here. This is the actual place as it is now, where that original picture of William Burroughs was taken. And I did become slightly obsessed with that during the PhD, as you do. So I ended up taking lots and lots of photos of that particular place. I also, I was also again using the headlines from the newspapers, various pieces of things. The PEs there, I think you probably, Gareth, you probably recognise that, the speak. Let me speak, please, cards. So there's lots of ephemera and things which I picked up during the PhD process, which ended up on these collages. And it was a way of working with that material and trying to analyse certain things that came up. This one, another one. So this one is, I think call it protest robots. These again were objects, everything from like a cream egg in a funnel, which is being sold at a charity auction for people with, just to get funds for people with dementia, to a robot which I came across in an exhibition, which was, it's a robot, it's a kind of a comfort robot, which doesn't look very comforting from here. I mean, the other thing is, I mean, you've got in this particular collage, everything from Brecon itself to Grenfell to, these are, and I think this again goes back to the non-representational theory, that there was a whole background hum to everything I was doing during that 3 years, which I felt needed to be sort of represented in some way in the work in the PhD itself. So, right, I'll go on to, again, this is essentially somewhere like Brecon already has lots of notice boards, which are almost like ready-made collages, because there's the sheer amount of stuff that's going on in Brecon. I found that you could actually sort of just by looking at these things, for example, in the market hall in Brecon, there's a massive advertising hoarding with all kinds of stuff going on in Brecon. So it gave you a sense of what was going on in that place. As I said, the geographical turn of this was me trying to think about not just the group I was with, the people who I saw variously. It turned from being dementia-friendly Brecon into sort of establishing the first dementia meeting centre. So that is part of the PhD, but also it's just getting the sense of the place itself, or Brecon itself, through the collages. So those are the PhD collages. Now on to the optic collages. So the fantastic thing about the optic project was, for me, as you know, coming to the end of the PhD, I'm thinking, well, what can I do with these creative methods which I really enjoy using? I need to be able to use them with other people. So the optic project really gave me that opportunity. As I said earlier, we worked, one of the sessions that we did with optic was up in a valleys community in the Heads of the Valleys. After we'd spent an hour or so playing the game that we devised with the advisory group, suddenly it was, for the first time, I was able to actually use a proper sort of able to use the collage technique with other people, and it was quite fascinating because, and maybe you could try it later on, but getting people to sit around and cut things out opens out all kinds of ways of getting people to actually communicate in different ways. So, you know, there's a lot of work that goes into making a collage in terms of you have to use quite site-specific material as well. So we used here images from local newspapers. This one is from Pontypool, you know, and it was fascinating just to hear how the older people in the group and the younger people in the group suddenly started to communicate and talk about, you know, some of the flooding that had been happening locally. You know, there were other sort of, you know, it was quite amazing to hear as well how this was a post-industrial mining community, but you know, there was a sense in which the younger children there just did not feel that connected at all to that past. So again, whilst making a collage, there was a lot of opportunity for people to actually just to start talking about things, everything from this being the kind of the past that was, you know, rapidly fading away really in those communities, because it seemed like, you know, people who were part of this particular group, for example, they were in their mid-70s, and even their memories were beginning to fade about the whole coal community. But the children seriously did not know, you know, that they saw so Tower Colliery is one of the collieries closest there. Now for the children, it's Zip World. You know, it's Zip World. It's nothing else. But they suddenly, by actually sitting down and actually creating this collage, people were actually beginning to communicate and talk about the past in different ways. So for me, it was just fantastic to be able to actually see the power of the actual method itself. You know, without much intervention from me, apart from actually setting it up and making sure that there was enough material there and enough glue and enough Frit stick and scissors. You know, it was all I had to do was actually sort of observe and listen and see how these little conversations became more and more important to the people there. So hopefully we're meant to be going back there and presenting with these posters, aren't we? These collages at some point, because it was a fantastic place to do this. So so I think, am I at time? Have I? Yeah, am I okay? So basically, I'd say that, you know, these two sort of methods which I've used and I've been able to develop a bit more have been great at as means of analysis, ways of making what is familiar strange, but also like sensitizing methods. So, you know, it's a good way of being able to co-produce with others, because basically it's quite a democratic thing. Most people can sit around and cut a few things out, put things together, and come up with something potentially new. I think also that actually the strength of these methods is that they actually begin to make you realize that actually there might be other ways of thinking. You know, so yeah, any questions?
So methods to avoid dementia. What I read about is avoiding tin foil.
Okay.
Come across that before?
No.
It might not be hopes, but it's I'd throw it out there. There's an interesting observation. The miners' strikes come up twice now in terms of the museum and getting around again, and with the research, and it's kind of sad really that there's that disconnect. I've not come across that before. And just a little observation, when I was in Aberystwyth, we were training some German exchange teachers, and they were all from Baden-Württemberg, which is over on the east side of East Germany. And their knowledge of the mine strikes absolutely astounding. So it's funny how there are sort of cultural changes between how people sort of interact with history as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. As I said, you know, I mean, being up in here for it was literally about 3 or 4 hours. But you know, I'd like to go back there really. I mean, and that was the one thing with the Opti project, which we weren't able to do, I guess, is just have the more long-term relationships with communities, which, you know, I mean, unfortunately for lots of research, you know, it's just not, you're just not able to do that unless you've got a massive research grant which enables you to do it. And the PhD, for example, enabled me to go up to Brecon for 3 or 4 years. You know, I still have a relationship with that community in Brecon. It was quite astounding in that short window, just to listen to what I have to admit. Initially, I thought this is never going to work. Initially, it was quite chaotic because we had, you know, a group of older people who were actually sitting down deliberating, and a group of younger people who were, you know, well, the minute they started to play the actual dice game, that was the thing that really sort of got them interested. And then by the end of the session, we had 3 tables quietly, diligently, just cutting things up and putting them together, and it was just amazing. Yeah. That doesn't answer your point.
I can maybe just give it a bit about the aluminium. I think it relates to the aluminium and how we get it. People were worried originally that it might impact the pounds and be a cause of factor in things. Really? But actually, it looks like it's probably a result of having some forms of dementia that some things are not clear very well in the mind. It's probably either, it might just be a random association, but if they don't think it's a cause of factor, it might just be the other.
Oh my God. No, that's, can I just say, that's triggered a memory. When my kids were young, I go back to 35 years, they had soya milk because the doctor had said soya milk to stop them having skin issues and eczema. And then we were on it for a year. Things are beautiful, like something. You know, but then after they stopped, they got somebody called and said, shouldn't give them soya milk because the carcass inside the carcass is aluminium. So that's going to cause dementia in later life, which we sort of thought, well, it didn't come up with a very reputable source at all. We just sort of ignored it. But that's there's a link there. So I did. I had one thing to sort of stop having something, and you might perhaps give them something far worse. I don't know. But it is, yes, it's like it is tricky something way back in the back of my mind. Yeah, soya milk.
But you know what it is, it's that thing, and it just drives me mad, the way science communication is so bad. Because basically, number one, we're all going to die of something.
Yeah.
Number two, things can be true at a population level. This is where the newspapers are going on.
This is
so it's true that maybe there is some association, somebody somewhere about between aluminium and dementia. But it's random at the individual level because of the epigenetics, you know, the way it interacts with the genetics and environment. Yeah. So really, you can do anything.
But there's
it's the blaming nature of the way the newspaper.
The newspapers are interesting because basically very directive language used. So, you know, eat salads to beat dementia. you know, eat curry to beat dementia.
Slide again every time, you know,
Yeah.
like where you have all the music, all the daily expression
Yeah.
together.
Oh,
Because I would.
previous, yeah, so it's just, oh, just that, do that. But the interesting thing with that was actually, so you had the headlines about dementia, which were all very directive and all very like, do this, do that. Whereas the ones about Brexit were all, we feel this, we feel that. Yeah, so there's a difference in the discourse there. Yeah.
I did a small project during.
Oh, that's the one.
Sorry?
No, I think it's the
During
one.
COVID,
That one.
looking
That
at,
one.
the
There you go. Thank you.
risk of dying and how newspaper represented. But I think what you've done there is such a great visual way of making a point about a media analysis.
Yeah.
You know, that would be such a good way of communicating that. But so somebody is at home during COVID, totally isolated, and this is the message they're getting daily.
Yeah.
This is their thing that's their communication.
And we think that newspapers aren't, they're still
And
important.
the Daily Express really is aimed at us.
Yes.
And that's why they have to mention that they're using beer selling it's just rotten.
It is.
I can always guarantee that each of those headlines relate to publication of scientific paper, where they just picked out.
Oh, they're totally, that's what they do.
And they just give it, don't they, as an absolute given. And that's what a lot of people do not want to talk to the press, because it's completely misrepresented, which exacerbates the problem.
There also is a huge amount of confusion, because you know, half of those are contradictory, you know, so copy will give you.
I don't add to the confusion by, you know, the cut-ups can actually, you come up with some pretty nonsense poetry at some point, you know, I'm not making any claims otherwise, but then occasionally, if you really get into the method, you come across things you think, how did that come through? And it does give you a slight insight, more than insight into like what the language.
We're being fed
Yes.
so much of the information overload, but this is the way that you're going to be jumbled up.
Control society.
You know, it'd be really interesting to take your, you know, you have all the list of the headline and use artificial intelligence to go into. Have you tried that?
I haven't tried that yet, but I would, I mean, that's,
They've done it because to see what it would come up with.
yeah.
The other way you do frequency count on a word cloud. So
Yeah.
how often each one turns out.
Yeah.
And you can do the same thing on your call. It is you better sort of numerical number in terms of how, you know, how frequent that point related to.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a bit more in the PhD. So I just hear it. There is quite a bit more analysis in the PhD, and it's sort of, you know, as I said, you know, there's some insights there. You think, well, okay. The other thing is that actually you can remake these things. I mean, I don't think that sometimes we're very keen on saying we fixed this, or there's this pattern, this and that. But actually, the whole shift in my mentality from the geographical work was really appreciate, you know, the fact that actually it's a process, and that we're living in a process. Every time I look at this, it's going to give me something new. Every time I look at the cut-up, it's going to give me something new, and it's important to shift that sometimes as well. I mean, you can look at patterns, but you know, it's kind of nice to be able to perform and look at these different.
We're going to mention about might be nice longitudinal studies, but the way you go back to the same community in 10 years' time, to run exactly the same exercise, the results are similar.
Yes, possibly. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well, thank you, Awen.
Oh,
That was
yeah,
brilliant.
fine.
Thank you very much. So Ree's been handing out evaluation forms, and if you're online, I believe Kim will be sending you an evaluation form. If you could fill it in, we would be eternally grateful. If you want copies of the comic book, drop us an email and we can send those out from Erin. We hope you've got something out of it online as well as we have here. And can I just again take the opportunity to thank our brilliant speakers and thank Ree and Kim for setting all this up. Without her tech skills, we apologise for the tech issues we had earlier on, but without Ree's tech skills, I think we've been scuppered. She says she's not a tech person, but clearly she is. So thank you very much. And I think we'll close this session now. For those in the room, I'm hoping lunch is up there. And if you'd like to